Hey, what's going on, guys? Short Fuse here, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Usually my channel is all about either fighting game tutorials or fighting game news. However, I'm going to do something a bit more personal this time around. So I figured I'd share some of my PS1 traditional 2D fighting game memories. By the way, this is meant as a supplement in between the bigger tutorials, not a replacement. Been hard at work on the upcoming tutorials. It's just taking a little bit longer than expected because I'm revamping the entire production value, so bear with me. Now, for me, the PS1 is a console that has an undescribable amount of nostalgia attached to it. Like most kids in the early 90s, I first got introduced to fighting games in the arcade. Now, I didn't have an older brother who had a home console, and parents back in those days had that go play outside mentality. We didn't go to each other's homes as kids, so I never played a home console in my entire life. But in '94, I felt like I was old enough to start going to arcades on my own. Now, arcades were a scary place for a little kid. They were a smoke-filled cesspool for dope dealers and stereotypical 90s teenage punks. But other than the occasional teasing, they pretty much left us kids alone. Anyway, the first thing that caught my eye was the King of Fighters 94 cabinet. It had 94 in the title, so I assumed it was the newest game available. And I was right. So me and my friends put our tokens in and started playing. The rest is history. I spent most mornings in the arcade when I should have been at school, but morning was the best time. You see, most people were at school or work. The only one at the arcade were the occasional lone teenagers skipping school, and I capitalized on the fact that they were so bored and in need of entertainment that they would pay for a two-player game. So the standard of quality at the arcades was the only measurable frame of reference I had. So when I finally saw home consoles in action, like Super Nintendo for example, I thought, what the hell is this? It looks terrible. What's this D-pad thing? Where's the joystick? Needless to say, I had no desire whatsoever of owning a home console until I heard of this mystical, mysterious thing called the Neo Geo AES. Rumor had it that it plays the same game as its arcade counterpart. Now that piqued my interest until I saw the price. That was soul crushing. It costs more than all the things in our apartment combined. That was one dream that was never gonna happen. Now, as a kid in the pre-internet information age, I didn't really understand the difference between home consoles. There was a lot of them. Different names, different manufacturers. I just assumed they were all the same. Until in late 1995, I was in a mall and I heard a familiar sound emanating from one of the stores. It was the Street Fighter Alpha opening clip. So I decided to investigate, and lo and behold, it was a display booth with a PlayStation under glass and two joysticks protruding out of it, safely secured onto a weird rubber arm. On the booth there was a price tag that seems fairly reasonable compared to a Neo Geo. So when I saw the actual game in action, I couldn't believe that it looked exactly like the CPS arcade counterpart. That very day, I decided to embark on a journey that will lead to me owning one of these things, even if it kills me. Money was always tight, and my mother would never spend money on such frivolous and unnecessary things such as video games, so I knew I had to come up with the money on my own. Now, my grandmother would give me the equivalent of like $20 for my birthday or Christmas, but that was not even close to enough. So I had to hustle the way kids hustle. Stealing $2 or $3 a day from my Spurs, reselling football player stickers at a tiny profit, petty thefts from school children. It was all innocent, you know. There was this room at school where kids would leave their coats, and I ransacked that place every day. You'd find a little bit of lunch money, some cards, etc. Now, I'm not saying that was okay to do, but kids are kids, you know. So slowly but surely, I was getting closer to my goal. Until around Christmas time 1996, I had enough capital for a PS1 and one game. I was lucky too, cause my sorta wealthy friend had one of those ASCII fight sticks that looked like the OG PS1 console. He played with it once and never touched it again, so he gladly lent it to me for an indeterminate amount of time. Of course, I couldn't let my mother find out, about my little PS1 mission, cause she'd be like, where'd the money come from? And why are you spending it on this crap? So I waited till she go visit her sister, which was usually an all-day endeavor, and made my way on foot to the mall. Now this was before specialized video game chains. Usually there'd be like little sections with games in electronic department stores. The games would be under lock and key behind glass, so the mall was my only option, but it was far away from the city. I had to walk for about 10 miles in each direction, and it was cold as hell, not to mention I had to illegally cross 2 major freeways on foot to get there. But none of that mattered to me. I was getting a friggin' PlayStation. The worst thing about the whole journey there was that I had no way of knowing if the store still had the PS1s for sale or which games were available. I had my heart set on King of Fighters 95, but for the most part, I was just winging it. Looking back, I could have called from a payphone, but kids are dumb. When I finally reached the mall, ran up the escalator staircase, and saw quite a few PS1s still available, I was relieved. I quickly grabbed a box and I was off to the game section. King of Fighters 95 was not there, however they had Street Fighter Alpha 2 and Real Bout Fatal Fury. I was torn but eventually settled on Real Bout, especially since for some reason it was $15 cheaper than Alpha 2, which gave me the chance to buy a memory card. Now that right there was one of the happiest moments of my life. I was on top of the world. I had it all. Now younger generations will have a very hard time understanding this particular feeling. Making the switch from arcade to home console was a huge deal. I loved arcades, I loved the general atmosphere, I loved the people, I loved the smell, the entire concept and the friends I've made there, but it also had its downsides. It was dog eat dog. You didn't have time to mess around and try combos at your own pace in the comfort of your own home. When you were up, you had to bring it. You lose, and to the back of the line you go. And all the machines weren't always available. It was noisy, crowded, damp, and you always felt like the whole world was watching your every move, and you always had something to prove. Not to mention wasting a lot of money for every bout. But at home, whole different story. The freedom that comes with a home console as opposed to the arcade was undescribable at the time. You sit at home in your underwear, looking like a putz, not giving a damn, testing out combos and techniques at your leisure without anyone badgering you. Pure freedom. It gave me a completely new outlook on fighting games. It used to be a desperate fight to stay alive for one more round, any way you can, but now it became a fine and delicate art with little secrets, nuances, and techniques that could be mastered little by little. So eventually I made it home, but I didn't have the balls to set the thing up because my mother would be home any minute. So I just looked at the box, read the manuals, fantasized about actually playing the goddamn thing. When she finally came home and went to sleep, I snuck out of my room, set it up, and bam, PS1 opening screen. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. I swear that was the sweetest sound in the world. Only problem was the fight stick buttons were loud as all hell. And even though Ma was a heavy sleeper, I wasn't gonna risk it. So I used the D-pad that night. But nonetheless, it was an amazing experience that will be forever engraved in my memory till the day I die. Good times indeed. It was only after months of sneaking around and clandestine play that I realized how it was all done in vain. One morning I was sure Ma already left for work. I started playing before going to school, but little did I know she was still home. I got caught red-handed and she simply asked, "What's that thing you got there?" And I just went with a casual and nonchalant, I just borrowed this video game from a friend, and she bought it. No questions asked. She really had no ballpark idea of how much these things cost, or that you don't just simply land something like a PlayStation to a friend. And that was it. Anticlimactic, I know. I envisioned a scenario where I'd be chased around the kitchen table with a broom, but that didn't happen. Alright, now let's take a look at the games. For the first year, the only game I owned was Real Bout and the first Street Fighter Alpha that a friend of mine sold to me for a few bucks. And it was more than enough. Occasionally I borrowed some games here and there, but in '99, a guy opened up a tiny little independent video game store, and he was buying and most importantly selling used games for crazy low prices. And used fighting games especially always go down in price quickly after release. Every dime I had, I spent it there, and I was buying one game per month, almost all under 15 bucks. And when the PS2 came out, the prices of PS1 games went even lower. It was a wonderful time to be a fighting game fan and a PS1 owner. So much so that I didn't buy a PS2 till late 2002, since the PS1 had so much to offer. And I was lucky my neighbor bought a Dreamcast on launch day, so we played Street Fighter 3, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, etc. at his place daily. Unfortunately, SNK didn't have much of a presence on the PS1 in Europe. The only SNK fighters that came out in PAL territories were Real Bout Fatal Fury, King of Fighters 95, and Samurai Showdown 3. That was it. Capcom fighting games, on the other hand, were booming on the PS1. First and foremost, the Alpha Trilogy. Now, Alpha 1 was a bit bare bones and bland and had some of the ugliest box art I've ever seen. But Alpha 2 and Alpha 2 Gold on the Street Fighter collection, that was where it was at. It looked beautiful, played smooth as butter, sizable cast, and of course, it introduced one of the most important fighting game mechanics that shaped the industry for years to come: the custom combos. The idea of canceling a special move into another was unheard of before, and Alpha 2 was the first to do it, with SNK following suit in 2002 with King of Fighters 2002. Darkstalkers also had a presence with Darkstalkers 1 and Darkstalkers 3. The Versus series was there, Marvel vs. Capcom, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, and most importantly, Capcom vs. SNK. Before I found out it would be coming out on PS1, I feared I'd have to get my hands on a Dreamcast to play it, but luckily they ported it to PS1 as well. You have no idea how big of a deal this was back in the days. It's like if the Red Sox merged with the Yankees. The PS1 was a console that just kept on giving even when it was on its last legs. The 2000s rolled around and awesome fighting games kept getting ported to the system. Newcomer Rival Schools, which for some reason has a special place in my heart, which is a bit weird since I've always been a very outspoken against 3D polygons instead of sprites, but Rival Schools was something special. It wasn't dull and lifeless like Street Fighter X1 and 2, it was bright and vibrant and cartoony. The gameplay was so over the top, balls to the wall, ridiculous. I have yet to meet somebody who doesn't love Rival Schools. It's fast paced and frantic, but it isn't highly technical. This used to be my unwind and relax game, along with Pocket Fighters. A tongue-in-cheek, guilty pleasure game that I probably take more seriously than I should, but look at it, come on, it's adorable. And the gameplay is actually pretty tight. And last but not least, on the tail end of the 90s, a little game that would later spun its own genre came out, Guilty Gear. Its gameplay was something we'd never seen before. It definitely borrowed inspiration from the Capcom Versus series, but it felt different, unique, able to stand on its own merits. Also, the game looked so different graphically and stylistically than any other fighter I've ever seen. Nobody could have expected it would become such a phenomenon during the PS2 era, and now again 3 console generations later. It deviated so much from traditional 2D fighting games that I like to use the term Guilty Gear style fighters when talking about games that have air dashes, air follow-ups, dust attacks, and chain-based combo systems. You know, your Melty Bloods, your Blast Blue, your Hakuto no Kens, Dragon Ball Fighters, etc. Man, looking back, it still feels unbelievable how much the PS1 had to offer. You cannot imagine the feeling of owning what was essentially an arcade with swappable discs at home. I'll be forever grateful to Sony for making the latter part of the 90s the happiest time of my life. If you didn't grow up in arcades and home consoles were ubiquitous to you, you will never understand what a big deal this was. The convenience, the peace of mind, the accessibility, and most importantly, the ownership. This was all mine, to own and to keep forever. And look how much thought and care was put into these cases. the artwork, the hefty manuals I spent hours browsing through just because. Absolutely amazing. I'm a little sad that I sold my original PS1 when the PS2 came out, since it was retro compatible, but later I bought one of those mini PS1s. I always use it for PS games, even though I could just play them on the PS2. I don't know, it's just a unique feeling, playing it on its original hardware. Nostalgia is a funny thing. So in conclusion, the PS1 may not have some of my favorite games of all time. That honor goes to PS2, of course, or the most good looking, or the smoothest gameplay and loading times, but it's the console and games that carry with them the most nostalgia and had the most significant impact on my life. That's why I play them to this very day on this very system. I got the entire Alpha collection on the PS2 disc with faster loading times and more convenient selection menu, but I always go with the PS1 version. I got the Orochi collection, Darkstalkers collection on the PS2, but when I feel like playing 95 of Darkstalkers, I go for the PS1 disc. Capcom vs SNK loads much faster on the Dreamcast, but again, PS1 disc. The loading times, no autosave features, clunky menu screen, it's all part of the experience that brings those good old times back to life. And that's a wonderful thing. Alright guys, if you made it to the end of the video, I want to thank you for watching, and also I want to thank everybody who subscribes to my channel. If you feel like it, you can leave a comment and share your PS1 fighting game memories. I'd like to hear them. As always, thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.